The rope was already around Nathan Monroe's neck when Kate Keating rode her bay gelding through the crowd at a dead run, scattering miners and mule skinners alike, waving a leather satchel over her head like a flag of war. "Cut him down," she shouted, and her voice cracked across the town square of Cascade Gulch louder than the wind that had been howling down off the Sierra Peaks all that April morning of 1877. "Marshal Tillman, you cut that man down this instant, or I swear before God you'll answer for a murder of your own making." The gallows had been thrown up hasty in front of the assay office, green pine boards still weeping sap, and Nathan stood on the trap with his hands bound, and his hat gone, and his dark hair plastered to his forehead with sweat despite the cold. He was a big man, broad through the shoulders the way ranch work built a man, and he had not begged, not once, though the whole town had come out to watch him die for the murder of Ezra Lang. Marshal Cobb Tillman held up a hand to the man at the lever, an old miner named Purdy who looked like he wanted no part of this business at all. "Miss Keating, this ain't the time. It is exactly the time." Kate swung down from the saddle before the horse had even fully stopped, and she was breathing hard, dust caked to the hem of her riding skirt, and she thrust the satchel at him. This was Ezra Lang's. He left it under the floorboard of the room he rented at my place the night before he died, and I did not find it until this morning because I did not think to look, God forgive me, until I remembered him asking me to keep something safe if anything happened to him. There is a letter in there naming the man who threatened his life, and it is not Nathan Monroe. A murmur went through the crowd like wind through dry grass. Silas Prout, who owned the stamp mill and half the paper on half the claims in the district, stood near the gallows in a gray coat too fine for a mining camp, and his face had gone the color of old tallow. "This is a trick," Prout said, stepping forward. "The woman is sweet on the accused, Marshal. Everybody in this camp knows he bought her contract at the debt auction not 3 weeks back. Of course she'd ride in with some tale to save her own property investment." Kate turned on him so fast her braid whipped across her shoulder. "I am not his property, Mr. Prout, and you know it better than any man here, since you were the one bidding against him to buy me yourself." She turned back to the marshal before Prout could answer, and there was steel in her voice now, the kind that came from a woman who had buried her own father not 4 months past, and had learned since then that grief did not excuse a person from having to be strong. "Read the letter, Marshal. Ezra Lang wrote it in his own hand 2 days before he died. He names Jed Calloway as the man who came to threaten him over the survey lines, and he says Calloway works for Silas Prout. Nathan Monroe was at my ranch signing debt papers with my own hand as witness the whole afternoon Ezra Lang was killed on the toll road. Ask my hired man, Pete. Ask my neighbor. There are 4 people who will swear to it under oath, and I have brought 2 of them with me right now." Behind her, 2 riders reined up, an old cattleman named Pete Sorrell and a younger hand called Sam Whitcomb, both nodding grim confirmation to the marshal's questioning look. Tillman took the letter out with hands that were not quite steady, unfolded it, and read. The square had gone dead quiet except for the creak of the gallows rope swaying in the wind, and Nathan Monroe stood there on the trap with the noose still around his throat, watching Kate Keating with an expression she would remember for the rest of her life, something between disbelief and a hope he did not dare let show too plain. "Get him down," Tillman said finally, his voice hoarse. "Get him down now." Purdy did not wait to be told twice. He was up the ladder and cutting the rope before Prout could raise another word of protest, and Nathan came down off the trap on his own 2 feet, staggering only a little, his hands still bound behind him until Kate herself stepped up with her boot knife and cut the rawhide loose. "You are a fool," she told him, low, so only he could hear it, her fingers not quite steady on the knife. "A man ought to know when to argue for his own life instead of standing there like a martyr in a church picture." "I was saving my breath," Nathan said, rubbing at his wrists, "in case somebody rode in with proof." His voice was rough from the rope and from 3 days in the jail cell, but there was the ghost of a smile at the corner of his mouth, and his eyes, gray as a Nevada winter sky, did not leave her face. "I had a feeling it might be you. You had no such thing. You had a rope around your neck and no earthly reason to hope for anything." "I had you," he said, simple as that, and something in Kate's chest turned over hard enough to hurt, and she looked away first, busying herself with coiling the cut rawhide rather than answer him, because she did not yet trust what her own voice might do. Pruitt had gone, slipped back through the crowd sometime in the confusion, and Kate noted it the way she noted weather changing, filing it away as something that would matter later. The marshal was already calling for Jed Calloway to be found and held for questioning, and the crowd, so hungry a quarter hour before to watch a hanging, had turned instead into a crowd hungry for a different kind of spectacle, and Kate felt the whole shifting temper of the town like a horse feels a storm coming, in her skin before her mind had caught up. Tillman put Nathan back in the jailhouse that afternoon anyway, not as a condemned man now, but as a material witness while Calloway was hunted down, and it was there, in the narrow front office with the stove smoking, and the marshal gone out to organize a search party, that Kate finally said the thing that had been sitting in her like a stone since the auction 3 weeks before. "You sold me at auction," she said. Nathan sat on the wrong side of the bars still, though the door stood open now, and he looked up at her, startled by the flatness of her voice after the fire of an hour before. "You stood there in front of the whole camp, Nathan Monroe, and you put money down for my contract like I was a plow horse or a crate of dry goods, and you have let me live under your roof for 3 weeks now as your hired woman with the whole town whispering about what kind of arrangement it really is between us. I owe you my life twice over today. I know it, and I am grateful, truly I am. But I will not go on being grateful and ashamed in the same breath. Now you set me free, or you marry me honest, in a church, in front of witnesses, so no man in this territory can ever again stand up at auction and put a price on me like I was cattle." Nathan was quiet a long moment. Outside, the wind had picked up again, carrying the smell of wet pine and the far-off roar of Cascade Creek running high and mean with snowmelt. "I bought your debt paper," he said at last. "Not because I wanted to own anything, Kate. I bought it because Silas Pruitt was bidding on it too, and I have seen what becomes of women who go to work off a debt in that man's house, and I was not going to stand there with money in my pocket and let that happen while I watched." He stood, slow, careful of the door still being a jail door even open, and came to stand near the bars, close enough that she had to tip her chin up to hold his eye. "I meant to tear the paper up the same week. I did not, because the county recorder in Winnemucca has to formally release a debt contract or Pruitt could challenge it, buy it out from under you on some technicality, and I was not going to risk that while the ground was still soft on your father's grave, and you had nobody else standing between you and that man. I was wrong to let 3 weeks pass without telling you plain why, and I am sorry for that. But I never once thought of you as bought." "Then why?" Kate said, and her voice was not quite steady now either. "Did it feel that way to me every single morning I woke up under your roof?" He did not have an answer for that, not one that satisfied either of them, and she left him there in the jailhouse with the question hanging between the bars like smoke that would not clear, and rode back out to her own ranch on Willow Creek with her jaw set, and her eyes stinging in a wind that she told herself, unconvincingly, was only ever just the wind. The ride to Winnemucca was 2 long days each way along a toll road still soft with mud and snowmelt, switchbacking down out of the Cascade Gulch high country before it leveled onto the sage flats along the Humboldt River, and Nathan made it in 3, pushing his horse harder than he ought on the return leg, because he did not like the thought of Kate Keating alone on her ranch, any longer than necessary with Silas Pruitt's man still loose in the district, and murder still unsettled between them. He carried with him, folded into his coat, the release his own lawyer in Winnemucca had drawn, a full and formal discharge of the Keating debt contract, signed, witnessed, and recorded at the county courthouse under Nevada law so that no creditor, present or future, could ever again lay legal claim to Kate Keating's labor or person. He had paid the balance owed to Pruitt's mill in full out of his own herd money, the very last of it, enough to leave his own spring cattle drive thin on operating cash. And he had not told her that part, because he did not want the gift weighted down with the cost of it. He found her at the low pasture fence when he rode in past sundown on the third day, up to her knees in floodwater with a rope around a heifer's neck, hauling the animal back from the swollen creek where the spring melt had cut the bank away overnight. "Don't just sit there admiring the view," Kate called over her shoulder, not even turning to see who it was. "Get down here and pull." He was off his horse and into the water beside her before she'd finished the sentence, and between the two of them, they hauled the heifer clear just as another chunk of bank slewed off downstream with a wet, groaning crash. They stood there afterward, both soaked to the thigh in creek water cold enough to ache in the bone, breathing hard, and Kate looked at him properly for the first time since Cascade Gulch. "You look like a man who rode too fast and slept too little," she said. "I look like a man glad to see you upright and dry-footed," he said, "though I notice you have failed to manage the second part. I have 500 head of cattle and a creek trying to eat my best hay ground, Nathan Monroe. Dry feet were never on offer this spring." But there was warmth under the tartness now, and she did not step away when he reached out and steadied her elbow as she climbed the bank, and neither of them mentioned how long his hand stayed there after the ground was solid under her boots. He gave her the papers that evening at her kitchen table by lamplight, laying them out flat and smoothing the creases with a careful hand as though they were something fragile. "It is done," he said. "Recorded, witnessed, filed with the county. Pruitt cannot touch it, cannot buy it, cannot revive it. You are a free woman under the law, Kate Keating, same as you were the day you were born, and no man's coin changes that ever again." He sat back, and something in his shoulders eased, like he had been carrying a weight he had not let himself feel until he set it down. "I should have found a way to do this the same week I bought the paper. I am sorry it took a rope around my own neck to make me see how it looked from where you were standing." Kate looked at the papers a long time before she touched them, and when she finally did, her fingers trembled slightly, and she did not try to hide it from him. "Thank you," she said, and it cost her something to say it plain like that without armor around it. "I mean that all the way through, Nathan, thank you. You are free to go," he said. "Your own land, your own herd, your own name. Nobody's dead attached to it now. If you want me off your property tonight and never back on it, I will go and I will not argue." She looked up at him across the lamplight, and the silence stretched long enough that the fire in the stove popped once, twice, before she answered. "I did not say I wanted you gone," she said. "I said I wanted to be free. Those are not the same thing, and you of all men ought to know the difference, seeing as you are the one who just spent 3 days in the saddle proving it to me." Word of Nathan's freedom papers spread through Cascade Gulch faster than the spring runoff, and it should have settled the town's nerves. Instead, within the week, Silas Pruitt had turned it into something else entirely, standing at the bar of the Antler Saloon of an evening with a whiskey in his hand, telling anyone who would listen that a man did not spend the last of his herd money freeing a woman's debt out of simple decency. "Ask yourselves," Pruitt said, "why a rancher who claims innocence in Ezra Lang's murder is so almighty eager to buy loyalty from the one witness who saved his neck. Ask yourselves what a man with something to hide might pay to keep a pretty widow's daughter singing his tune in a courtroom." He let that sit in the smoky air of the saloon like a burr under a saddle blanket, and it worked exactly as he intended, because fear of losing the railroad spur line that half the camp believed would save Cascade Gulch from playing out like a dozen other dead camps in the district was a fear deep enough to make good men doubt what they had seen with their own eyes only days before. Nathan felt the change first in small ways. Men who had shaken his hand outside the jailhouse now found reasons to look elsewhere when he rode down the main street. The liveryman who had always given him fair rates on shoeing suddenly quoted him double, then found he had no time for Nathan's horses at all that week. And when Jed Calloway turned up, nowhere to be found, vanished clean out of the district before Marshal Tillman's search party had gone 3 days, Prout made certain the whole camp heard his theory that Calloway had fled not from guilt of his own, but from fear of a rancher wealthy enough and desperate enough to have him silenced before he could talk. It was against that backdrop, 2 weeks after the hanging that had not happened, that Kate rode up to Nathan's ranch on the shoulder of Eagle Pass with a purpose that had nothing to do with debt papers or gratitude, and everything to do with what she had found going through her father's old strongbox the night before. She found Nathan out past the corral, working a young sorrel gelding on a lunge line in the thin, cold light of morning, his shirt sleeves rolled and his forearms streaked with dust, and she sat her horse a moment at the fence just watching him work, the easy patience of his hands on the line, the low, steady murmur of his voice to the green colt, before she called out to him. "I need to show you something," she said, "and I think you are going to want to sit down first." He tied off the colt and came to the fence, wiping his hands on his trousers, studying her face with the same careful attention he gave a nervous horse. "You look like a woman who has not slept." "I have not." She dismounted and pulled a folded oilcloth packet from her saddlebag, and inside it, protected from the damp, were survey papers gone brittle and yellow with age, and a letter in a hand she recognized now as Ezra Lang's own careful, slanted script. "My father kept every scrap of correspondence he ever had about the water rights on Willow Creek, going back to when he first filed his claim in '68. Ezra Lang wrote to him last winter, before he ever came out to survey the new rail spur, asking questions about the original government survey markers on Eagle Pass. He suspected something was wrong even then. Nathan, look at this." Nathan took the papers and read slowly, his brow furrowing deeper with each line, and Kate watched the understanding settle over him like weather moving across a valley. "This says the original survey put the grade through the low saddle east of Cascade Creek," he said. "Through open range, not through settled land at all." "That's right. But the filing that went into the railroad company 2 months ago, the one that decided the route, runs the grade straight through Eagle Pass instead. Straight through your home ranch and straight through my Willow Creek water rights, both of which would have to be condemned and bought out under the railroad's right-of-way, at whatever price the company decides is fair. And who do you suppose holds the paper on most of the land the new route would have to purchase to make the old low-saddle route work instead?" "Prout," Nathan said, and his voice had gone very quiet and very hard. "Prout," Kate agreed. "He bought up every worthless acre of that low-saddle range 2 years back for pennies, betting nobody would ever want it. If the rail line goes through there like the original survey called for, that land becomes worthless to the company and worth a fortune to nobody. But if the line goes through Eagle Pass instead, through land he does not own, then the railroad has to condemn and purchase our land at government rates, and Prout collects a broker's fee for arranging the whole business, since he sits on the district land board that certifies the route. He has been paying off a surveyor to move a mountain pass on paper, Nathan, and Ezra Lang found it out, and was going to ride to Winnemucca to report it to the land office before somebody put a knife in him on the toll road." Nathan folded the papers with hands that were not quite steady now either, and when he looked up at Kate, there was something new in his face, a kind of fierce and grateful wonder that had nothing to do with the fraud itself and everything to do with the woman who had ridden 2 hours in the cold to bring it to him. "You could have taken this straight to Tillman," he said. "You did not have to ride here first." "I know," Kate said. "I wanted to." And she did not look away from him this time, and for a long, quiet moment neither of them said anything at all, the wind moving soft through the pines above the corral, the young sorrel colt blowing and stamping behind the fence, and something unspoken but entirely understood passing between them that felt, to both of them, like the first true thaw of that long, hard winter. They rode down to the mill together that afternoon to confront the one man who could confirm the survey fraud from the inside, an assay clerk named Otis Fenwick, who had been keeping Pruitt's books for 6 years and looked, when Kate and Nathan cornered him behind the ore-sorting shed, like a man who had been waiting a long time for somebody to ask him the right question. "I only ever kept the numbers he told me to keep," Fenwick said, glancing nervously toward the mill office, where lamplight showed through the frosted glass. "I never signed anything false myself, I swear it, but I have seen the correspondence." Pruitt paid the district surveyor, a man out of Reno name of Whitlock, near $2,000 to certify a route through Eagle Pass instead of the Low Saddle, and I have seen the letter where Ezra Lang wrote to Pruitt direct, telling him he meant to report the whole scheme unless Pruitt withdrew the filing himself. "Would you swear to that before the county land commissioner?" Nathan asked. Fenwick's face went pale as tallow candle wax. "Calloway is not the only man Pruitt has used rough business with, Mr. Monroe. I have got a wife and 3 children in that mill town. And I have got a rope burn still healing on my neck," Nathan said, not unkindly, from a lie Pruitt was glad enough to let stand. "I understand your fear, Fenwick, truly I do. But a man cannot keep his family safe by protecting the one thing that lets Pruitt feel safe himself. If we can bring the land commissioner proof enough, Pruitt loses his hold on this whole district, and every man he has ever leaned on breathes easier, including you." It took another hour of careful, patient talk, Kate adding her own steady reassurance where Nathan's directness ran too hot, before Fenwick agreed at last to write out a sworn statement, though he would not do it that night, fearful of being seen, and asked for 2 days to arrange his affairs and get his family safely to his sister's homestead outside of Camp First. Nathan agreed, against his own impatience, because Kate's hand on his arm reminded him that pushing too hard on a frightened man was no better than what Pruitt himself would do. Riding back toward Willow Creek in the long gold light of evening, their horses walking easy side by side along the toll road, Kate finally let herself ask the question that had been sitting behind her ribs since the fence line 2 weeks before. "Why does it matter so much to you?" she said. "Beyond your own land. You could have taken the railroad's buyout money for Eagle Pass and started fresh somewhere with cash in your pocket, instead of fighting a man like Pruitt who has already tried once to see you hanged." Nathan was quiet a moment, watching the last sun catch the snow still clinging to the high peaks above them. "My family had a farm in Missouri," he said finally, "before the war came through and burned it, and after, the railroad men came in buying up burned-out land for 1/10 its worth, telling folks it was that or nothing, since the banks would not lend to rebuild. My father took the buyout because he had 4 children and no choice, and I watched him become a smaller man every year after that, Kate, working another man's land for wages, until it finally broke something in him that never mended. I swore then that if I ever had land of my own, I would not let any man take it from me on a lie, not for any price, because I have seen what it costs a man's spirit to sell out from under a threat instead of standing on his own ground and fighting for it honest." Kate looked at him a long moment, and something in her chest that had stayed guarded even through the gratitude of the last 2 weeks finally loosened all the way. "My father used to say the same thing," she said softly, near enough word for word. "He came out here after the war too, looking for ground nobody could take from him. I think that is why I could not bear the thought of being auctioned off like chattel, Nathan, even for a debt that was fair and owed. It was not really about you at all, not at first. It was about every single thing my father built being reduced to a number a man like Pruitt could buy and sell." "I know that now," Nathan said. "I think I have known it since the jailhouse, if I am honest. I just did not know how to say it back to you without it sounding like I was asking for something in return." "And are you?" Kate asked, and her voice had gone very quiet, almost lost under the sound of the creek running high beside the road. "Asking for something." Nathan reined his horse in, and she stopped hers too, and for a long moment they simply sat there in the fading light, close enough that she could see the faint scar at his hairline from some old ranch accident, close enough to feel the warmth of him even in the cooling evening air. "Not yet," he said, and his voice was rough with something he was working hard to hold steady. "You told me once you wanted to be set free before anything else. You are free now, truly free, and I meant that with my whole heart when I gave you those papers. I'm not going to ask you for anything until I know it is you choosing it, not gratitude, not fear of Prout, not the two of us just leaning on each other because the world got hard all at once. When I ask you something, Kate Keating, I want you to have had every chance in the world to walk away first." Kate studied him a long moment, something bright and unsteady in her eyes that she did not try to hide this time. "That," she said finally, "is the most honest thing any man has ever said to me. Now kindly race me back to the fork in the road before this creek talk makes us both late for supper." And she put her heels to her horse and was gone down the muddy road laughing before he could answer, and Nathan sat there a moment longer, grinning like a fool at nothing at all, before he spurred after her into the last of the light. Otis Fenwick never got his 2 days. Word came down from the mill on the third morning, carried by a breathless boy sent running from the assay office, that Fenwick had been found beaten half senseless behind the ore shed, his jaw broken, his ledgers gone from the office safe, and no sign of who had done it, though everyone in camp who mattered understood well enough without being told. Fenwick himself, when Nathan and Kate reached his sister's homestead where he had been carried, would say only that 2 men had come in the night, masked, and warned him that talking to the land commissioner about anything at all would be the last talking he ever did. "It was Calloway," Kate said afterward, pacing the dirt yard outside the homestead while Nathan saddled up to ride for the marshal. "He never left the district at all. Prout only let it be said he'd fled so nobody would think to look for him close by. We have lost our witness," Nathan said grimly, "and our proof besides if the ledgers are gone." "Not all our proof," Kate said. "We still have Ezra Lang's letter to my father and the old survey. It is not enough to convict a murder, but it may be enough to force the land commissioner to review the root filing, if we can get to Winnemucca before Prout finds a way to bury that too." It was Marshal Tillman himself, grim-faced and finally free of whatever fear or favor had kept him slow to act before, who called the town meeting 3 nights later in the mill's own timber-framed assembly hall, the largest roof space in camp, to lay the whole matter before Cascade Gulch Plain. The murder unsolved, the missing foreman, the beaten clerk, and now, thanks to Kate and Nathan's evidence, real and serious doubt cast on the honesty of the very railroad route half the town had pinned their hopes on for the camp's survival. It did not go the way Kate hoped. Prout stood up before the whole hall could properly digest what the marshal had laid out, and he was masterful. Kate had to admit that much even through her anger, painting Nathan and Kate not as truth-tellers, but as a rancher and his hired woman-turned-lover, scheming to derail a railroad route that would bring jobs and freight and future to a dying silver camp, simply because it happened to run through land they wanted kept for themselves. "Ask yourselves," Prout said, his voice carrying easy and confident over the packed hall, "who benefits if the line goes through the Low Saddle instead of Eagle Pass? Not this camp. The Low Saddle route runs 11 miles further from the mill, adds a full day's freight haul, costs every man in this room and higher shipping rates on every ounce of silver we send out. Mr. Monroe here stands to lose nothing but the inconvenience of a right-of-way through the corner of his range, and gains a fat government buyout for it besides, while Miss Keating loses nothing at all except the chore of building a new water flume around a rail bed. Meanwhile, every one of you loses 11 miles of freight costs for the rest of your working lives. I ask you plainly, who is really scheming here?" It was a lie built cunning enough around a kernel of truth that Kate felt the whole room's mood tip against them like a wagon losing its wheel. Men who had shaken Nathan's hand a month before now folding their arms and looking away. And she understood in that moment, with a cold, sick certainty, Exactly what it felt like to stand where Nathan had stood on the gallows, at the mercy of a crowd's fear instead of its reason. Nathan stood to answer, and his voice was steady even though Kate could see the tight line of his jaw, the effort it cost him. "I will not stand here and pretend the low saddle route costs this camp nothing. Prude is right that it adds distance. But I would rather pay a few cents more a ton to ship honest silver down an honest road than build this camp's whole future on a lie that murdered a good man to keep it buried. Ezra Lang died because he found out the truth. Are you all so afraid of 11 extra miles of freight road that you are willing to let his killer walk free among you?" It should have swayed them. Kate could see, in some faces, that it nearly did. But fear of a dying camp ran deep in men who had already watched other silver towns collapse to nothing within a season once the ore or the rail money dried up. And when the vote came to ask the land commissioner to formally review the route filing, it failed. Narrow but real. 17 against. 14 for. And Prout smiled thin and cold at Nathan across the smoky hall as the meeting broke up into ragged, muttering knots of men filing out into the night. "You have made a powerful enemy for nothing, Monroe," Prout said quietly, pausing beside them on his way out, Kate's hand tightening involuntarily on Nathan's sleeve. "You should have taken your buyout and gone. Now I expect this camp will simply have to decide in time which of us it trusts to lead it forward. I do not think that decision will go your way a second time." They rode home from that meeting in silence for the first mile, the moon high and cold over the peaks, before Kate finally spoke. "We are not beaten," she said, though her voice was thinner than she meant it to be. "The land commissioner can still review the filing on his own authority if enough irregularity is shown, town vote or no town vote. We just need proof strong enough that he has no choice but to act." "And where do you propose we find that?" Nathan said, "now that Fenwick cannot speak and his ledgers are gone." Kate was quiet a moment, thinking, and then something occurred to her that made her sit up straighter in the saddle. The original ledgers might be gone from the mill office, but Prout would never trust duplicate books to stay only on paper that could be so easily stolen from him twice. "My father used to say a crooked man always keeps his second set of books somewhere he thinks is safe from thieves and safe from the law both. The mine, Nathan. The old lower drift of the Sentinel shaft has been sealed off for storage since the vein played out there 2 years back. Prout owns that claim too. If I were hiding papers I wanted kept from prying eyes but close enough to reach quick, that is exactly where I would put them." It began to rain before dawn. A hard, steady spring rain on top of snowpack already swollen far past what the mountains had held in years past. And by the time Kate and Nathan reached the mouth of the Sentinel mine 2 days later, guided by a reluctant old-timer named Gus Havorson, who had worked the lower drift before it closed and owed Kate a debt from her father's day, the whole district had begun to understand, with a dread that ran through every household along Cascade Creek, that this spring's runoff was shaping into something far worse than ordinary. "Water's coming down off Eagle Pass faster than I've seen in 20 years in this district," Gus said, squinting up at the gray, low clouds as they picked their way along the muddy trail to the mine entrance. "Snowpack up there is twice what it ought to be, and now this rain on top of it. If that upper flume Prout built to feed his stamp mill backs up much more, it is going straight down into the old workings instead of around them, same as it near did in 73. The Sentinel's lower drift ran nearly a quarter-mile back into the mountain, a warren of old tunnels and stopes braced with timber that Gus admitted, grimacing, had not been properly inspected in 2 years since the claim went idle. And it was there, in a locked storage room off the third crosscut, that they found what they had come for. A false-bottomed strongbox holding a full second set of Prout's mill ledgers, correspondence with the bribed surveyor Whitlock detailing the payment for the falsified route filing, and folded inside an oilcloth wrapper at the very bottom, the original, uncorrupted survey plat showing the government line through the low saddle exactly as Ezra Lang's letter had said. "We have it," Kate breathed, hardly daring to believe it, holding the plaid up to the lantern light. "Nathan, we have everything we need." It was in that same instant that the mountain groaned. The sound came first, a deep, grinding rumble that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once, and then Gus Halvorson's face went the color of ash and he grabbed Kate's arm hard enough to bruise. "That's the flume," he said. "That's the whole upper flume giving way. God help us, it's coming down into the shaft." They ran for the main drift with the strongbox clutched against Kate's chest, and behind them the rumble grew to a roar, water finding its way down through cracks and old boreholes with a speed that seemed impossible, already ankle-deep by the time they reached the first crosscut, rising visibly even as they splashed through it, cold as ice and smelling of mud and old rock. "There's men still working the main shaft," Gus shouted over the growing noise. "3 of them, maybe 4, taking out timber salvage on the second level. They won't hear this coming, not with the stamps running up top." Nathan did not hesitate. "Kate, get that strongbox and Gus up and out now. I'm going for the men." "I'm not leaving you down here," Kate said, already moving with him rather than away, sloshing through water now nearly to her knees. "Kate, I know this mine better than you do, Nathan Monroe. My father worked this claim before it went idle, and arguing with me is costing us both time we do not have. Gus, get topside and get every man you can find down here with rope and lanterns. Go." They found the salvage crew at the second-level junction. 3 miners working by lamplight with picks and crowbars, utterly unaware of the water rising toward them through the lower workings. And it took only a shouted warning and the rising sound of the flood itself to send them scrambling for the main shaft. But the ladder there, old and half-rotted, gave way under the second man's weight with a sickening crack, dropping him hard onto the landing below with a cry of pain that told Kate a leg was broken before she even reached him. "Timber's cracking," one of the other miners shouted, pointing his lamp up at the crosscut ceiling, where a support beam, already strained by 2 years of neglect and now soaked through, had begun to bow visibly under the weight of wet rock above it. "That whole section's going to come down." Nathan got his shoulder under the injured man's good arm, half carrying, half dragging him toward the winds that led up to the next level, while Kate held the lantern high and guided the other 2 miners past the failing timber, water now surging around their knees, cold enough to steal the breath from their lungs, the roar behind them growing louder by the second as more of the flume's contents found their way down into the mountain's old wounds. "There's a second way out," Kate called, remembering suddenly a detail from her father's old claim maps. "An old drainage adit my father helped dig when this was still his partner's ground before Prout bought in, cut through to daylight on the north face, above the flood line. It's faster than the main shaft from here." "Can you find it in the dark with water rising?" Nathan shouted back. "I can find anything on this mountain my father ever set foot on," Kate said, and there was no doubt in her voice at all, only the same fierce certainty that had carried her into a hanging crowd 3 weeks before with a satchel over her head. And Nathan, hearing it, simply nodded and followed her lead without another question, trusting her completely in a way that settled something deep and warm in her chest, even in the middle of all that cold and roaring danger. She led them left at a junction that looked, to Nathan's eye, exactly like every other black hole in the rock, and then right along a narrow crosscut barely wide enough for 2 men abreast, water now surging thigh-deep and rising, the injured miner groaning with every jolt of his broken leg, and behind them the groan of failing timber grew to a splintering crack that told them the crosscut they had just left was collapsing in earnest. "There," Kate said, pointing her lantern at a low, narrow opening half hidden behind a fall of loose shale. "That's the adit. It's tight, but it climbs fast and it comes out well above the creek." They went through single file, Nathan going last so he could brace the injured man from behind, the passage rising steeply enough that the water fell away below them step by step. And by the time gray daylight showed ahead through a screen of brush and old timber shoring, the roar of the flood had faded to a distant, muffled thunder instead of a thing chasing at their heels. They came out onto the north face of the mountain into a rain that had eased to a fine, cold drizzle, and below them, through the trees, they could see the whole lower slope alive with lanterns and shouting men. Gus Halvorson's rescue party arriving just as they emerged, and there was a long, ragged cheer from the gathered crowd when they saw all 6 of them, filthy and soaked and exhausted, walking out under their own power with the injured miner supported between 2 other men. It was Marshal Tillman himself, arriving breathless from town with half the population of Cascade Gulch trailing behind him drawn by word of the flood, who reached them first. And it was Marshal Tillman who took the strongbox from Kate's arms with something like reverence when she explained, in a voice hoarse with cold and exertion, exactly what it contained. "Every man here saw you 2 go into that mountain to save miners who work for the very man you have been fighting," Tillman said, looking around at the crowd, many of whom Kate recognized from the town meeting 3 nights before, the same men who had voted against reviewing the route filing, now watching Nathan Monroe with faces scrubbed clean of the suspicion Prout had so carefully built. "And every man here is going to hear, this very hour, exactly what is in that box, and exactly what it means about who has been telling the truth in this district and who has been buying lies." Silas Prout tried to run when word reached the mill office that afternoon that his second ledgers had surfaced, that Otis Fenwick, safe now at last with his family and no longer alone, had found his courage restored enough to swear a full statement once he learned Prout's own hidden proof had already been recovered, and that Marshal Tillman was riding up with 4 deputized men to see him arrested for conspiracy, fraud, and complicity in the murder of Ezra Lang. He did not get far. Jed Calloway, found hiding in a line shack 2 miles up the North Fork where he had been sheltering since the beating of Fenwick, gave up Prout's whole scheme without much fight, once he understood the ledgers had been recovered, and his own neck was the one now closest to a rope, confessing that Prout had ordered Lang silenced when the surveyor refused a bribe to keep quiet about the falsified route, and that Calloway himself had done the killing on the toll road and planted Nathan's own dropped pocket knife. Lost weeks before during a chance meeting on the road, at the scene to point suspicion away from himself and toward a rancher Prout already wanted removed from Eagle Pass. Prout, cornered at last in his own mill office with the marshal's men at the door and the whole camp gathered outside in the drizzle to watch, did not go quietly, drawing a small pistol from his desk drawer in a last, desperate motion. But Nathan, who had followed the marshal's party up from the mine still soaked and exhausted, was faster, closing the distance and pinning Prout's arm to the desk before the shot could clear the barrel. The pistol clattering harmless to the floorboards while Prout shouted curses that nobody outside the office bothered to listen to anymore. "It is over, Silas," Nathan said, holding him there until the marshal's men came to take him properly in hand. "You murdered an honest man to protect a lie about 11 miles of freight road, and you tried to hang me for it besides. There is no route left for you to buy your way out of now." The land commissioner, summoned by urgent letter that same week, and riding up from Winnemucca within 4 days once word of murder and fraud both reached his office, reviewed the recovered survey plat and correspondence in an afternoon, and voided the falsified route filing entirely, ordering the original low-saddle survey reinstated as the official route for any future railroad spur into the district. A decision that cost the camp its 11 miles of shortcut freight road, but saved both Nathan's ranch at Eagle Pass and Kate's water rights on Willow Creek from ever being condemned at all. Prout was held over for trial at the county seat on charges that would, in time, see him convicted as an accessory to murder and sentenced to Nevada's state prison at Carson City, while Calloway's own confession, and the noose he had so nearly seen fitted around an innocent man's neck instead of his own, would see him hanged that autumn for the murder of Ezra Lang, a sentence Kate heard news of with no satisfaction at all, only a quiet, tired grief for a good surveyor who had died simply for telling the truth. It was 3 weeks after the flood, with the mud finally drying on the toll road and the mountain snowpack settling at last into an ordinary, manageable spring melt, that Nathan rode up to the Keating Ranch on Willow Creek in the soft gold light of a late afternoon, dressed not in his work clothes, but in a clean shirt Kate had never seen before, his hair combed, looking, she thought with a private smile she did not let show on her face, considerably more nervous than he had looked standing on a gallows trap with a rope around his neck. She was mending fence along the low pasture, the same stretch of bank the flood had nearly claimed a month before, now shored up solid with new posts and fresh-cut rails, and she straightened up, wiping her hands on her apron, watching him approach with a curiosity she made no effort to hide. "You look like a man who has come to say something particular," she said, "and cannot quite work out how to begin." "I have been working out how to begin it for 3 weeks," Nathan admitted, dismounting and standing there with his hat in his hands, turning the brim slowly through his fingers. "I kept telling myself I would wait until you had every chance to walk away from all of this, from Prout, from the flood, from everything that got tangled up between us before you ever had a fair choice in the matter. I do not think that day is ever going to come clean and separate the way I imagined, Kate. Trouble does not wait politely for a man to court a woman proper, so I have decided I am done waiting for some perfect, quiet moment that trouble is never going to hand me." Kate set down her fencing pliers and came to stand near him, close enough now that she could see the color rise faintly in his face, despite the evening cool. "Then say what you came to say, Nathan Monroe, and stop turning that poor hat inside out before you ruin the brim entirely." He laughed, short and a little rough, and set the hat aside on the fence rail as if to save it from further damage. "I am not asking you this because you saved my life, though you did, twice over if you count that mine as well as the gallows. I am not asking because I feel I owe you, or because it would settle any question of debt or property between us, since there is none left to settle. The county recorder saw to that months back. I am asking because I have watched you ride into danger with a satchel of proof over your head, and stand your ground in a town meeting full of men who would not listen to reason, and lead grown men out of a flooding mine through a passage only you remembered. And every single time, Kate, I have thought the same thing, plain and simple, which is that I would rather stand beside a woman like that for the rest of my life than own the finest ranch in the territory without her in it. I am asking you to marry me, not because anybody sold you to me at any auction, and not because either one of us needs saving anymore, but because I love you, honest and whole, and I would be glad and grateful if you would have me." Kate did not answer right away, and for one terrible instant Nathan's chest went tight with the fear that he had misjudged everything, but she was only looking at him, her eyes bright in the fading light, working to steady a voice that did not want to hold. "I told you once," she said finally, "set me free or marry me honest. You set me free first, Nathan, weeks before you ever said a word of love to me, and you did it without asking for a single thing in return. I have had every chance in the world to walk away since then, and I have not taken a single one of them, not because I could not, but because every day since that flood I have woken up wanting to see your face across a breakfast table, and I have gotten tired of pretending that wanting is not the same thing as loving." She stepped closer, close enough now that he could feel the warmth of her, close enough that his hands came up almost without his own permission to rest at her waist. "Yes, Nathan Monroe, I will marry you, honest and whole, and for no reason in this world except that I love you too." He kissed her then, there at the mended fence line with the creek running clear and quiet below them instead of wild and flooding, gentle at first and then not so gentle, and Kate's hands found their way to the front of his clean, new shirt, and somewhere in the pines above the pasture, a meadowlark began to sing, entirely indifferent to the two people standing tangled together in the gold evening light who had between them survived a hanging, a flood, and a fraud built to steal their homes, and had come out the other side of all of it holding onto something neither auction, nor accusation, nor rushing water had ever managed to take from them. They were married 6 weeks later, on a warm morning in early June, in the town square of Cascade Gulch, on the very ground where the gallows had stood only 2 months before. The gallows itself was long since torn down, the green pine boards salvaged into a footbridge across Cascade Creek, and in its place the townsfolk had strung bunting between the assay office and the mercantile, and Marshal Tillman, who insisted on standing witness himself, wore a coat brushed cleaner than anyone in camp had ever seen him wear before. Kate wore her mother's wedding dress, let out at the waist and taken in at the sleeves by Sam Whitcomb's wife, who had a fine hand with a needle, and she carried a small bunch of wild lupin picked that same morning from the low pasture where Nathan had proposed. Nathan wore the same clean shirt, pressed now, and stood at the front of the gathered crowd with an expression of such open, unguarded happiness that even Gus Havorson, not a sentimental man by nature, was heard to remark afterward that he had never seen a groom look less like a man being led anywhere against his will. Otis Fenwick, his jaw healed enough now to manage a full smile, stood near the front with his wife and children, safe and settled back into camp, once Prute's threat had been finally and fully removed. Pete Sorrell and half the ranch hands from both Keating and Monroe spreads had turned out in their best clothes, and even some of the men who had voted against Nathan at that bitter town meeting came forward afterward to shake his hand and admit, plain and without excuse-making, that they had let fear get the better of good sense, and were glad now to be proven wrong. The preacher who rode up from the nearest circuit church spoke plain words about honest partnership and hard-won trust, words that seemed, to everyone gathered there who had lived through that long spring of flood and fraud and near tragedy, to fit the two people standing before him better than any ordinary wedding sermon could have managed. "Do you, Kate Keating," he said, "take this man, honest and whole, of your own free will and choosing, with no bond upon you but the one you make today?" "I do," Kate said, and her voice did not waver at all. "And do you, Nathan Monroe, take this woman, honest and whole, promising to hold her free always, in body and in spirit, as your equal partner and not your possession, for as long as you both shall live?" "I do," Nathan said, "with my whole heart and gladly." When the preacher pronounced them married, the whole square erupted into cheering loud enough to startle the horses tied along the rail, and Nathan swept Kate up into a kiss that lasted a good deal longer than strictly proper for a town square wedding, and nobody, not the marshal, not the preacher, not a single soul gathered there, saw fit to hurry them along. Afterward, as the town settled into an afternoon of food and fiddle music laid out on long tables borrowed from the mercantile, Kate and Nathan stood together a little apart from the crowd, near the spot where the gallows trap had once stood, now simply an unmarked patch of dirt trampled soft by dancing feet. "It is a strange thing," Kate said quietly, looking around at the square, "to be married on the very ground where I once thought I might watch you die." "I have thought the same thing all morning," Nathan admitted, "but I find I do not mind it. This ground nearly took everything from us both, Kate, and instead it gave us to each other. I would rather remember it this way from now on than any other way at all." Kate leaned into him, watching the fiddler tune up for the first dance, watching Marshal Tillman laughing with Gus Havorson over cups of cider, watching the whole small, hard-won, ordinary happiness of a mining camp that had nearly torn itself apart on a lie and had instead, in the end, found its way back to something true. "Eagle Pass or Willow Creek first?" she asked him, smiling, "for the wedding night, husband?" "I believe we own both now, between the two of us, and I confess I have not yet decided which ranch deserves the honor." "Both," Nathan said, pulling her close as the fiddle struck up its first bright, lively notes, and the whole square began to turn and laugh and dance around them. "We will run cattle on both and water on both, and raise whatever we build together across the whole of it, honest ground under honest hands, same as your father always wanted, same as mine. No auction, no lie, no man's coin ever laid on it again. Just us, Kate, for as long as we both shall live. And there in the town square of Cascade Gulch, Nevada, in the warm gold light of a June afternoon in 1877, with the snow long since melted clean off the high peaks, and the creek running steady and clear at last after its wild spring flood, Kate Keating and Nathan Monroe danced their first dance as husband and wife on the very ground where a hanging had once nearly stolen everything from them both, and found, in its place, only the beginning of everything they meant to build together. Free and equal and entirely, unshakably in love.